Number 1. The Bridge. There is a local legend in my town about a ghost that supposedly haunts the area. I've always found the story of what happened a lot scarier, though, than the idea of there actually being a ghost. I suppose that's because before this, I had always been really skeptical on the idea that ghosts could even possibly exist. Anyway, the legend goes that there was a young man on the way home from his job. His car died, and since this was on a more rural road, there were no payphones for him to call and get help. So he had to get out of his car and then try to walk to the nearest home in order to find a phone to call for help. While he was walking, he crossed over a bridge spanning a small creek. And that night, there was a man in that area who saw him approaching the bridge. The man under the bridge was a robber and a murderer who didn't have any money. As the man began crossing the bridge, the robber attacked him, intending to kill him and take his money. He succeeded in stabbing the man and pulling him under the bridge. However, the man wasn't dead and had a knife on him also. When the robber had him under the bridge, he began going through his pockets for his wallet and any other possessions. The man stabbed the robber right in the heart. Both men then died under the bridge. To a degree, I always found this story a bit hokey, really. I mean, if both men died, how did anyone ever know exactly what happened to them? Sounds like there would be no one around to tell the tale. But I guess that's the thing with legends. They don't need to come across as completely believable, as long as they are enjoyable. When I was 16 years old, I had been over at a friend's house pretty late. His dad was in bed by the time I was ready to go home, and I didn't feel like calling my parents. It was actually a pretty beautiful night out with a large and bright full moon. So I decided to just go ahead and take a walk home. It would be a long walk, but I figured it would be worth it. Now, although I did always find that story hokey, that doesn't mean that I didn't find it scary. Some of the scariest things out there are hokey, and I had to cross over that bridge in order to get to my home. It was a bit after 1 in the morning when the bridge came into view. I could admit to beginning to feel a little bit nervous as I began to approach it. That nervousness only began to grow as I got closer and closer to the bridge. As I mentioned before, you don't have to believe a scary story in order to be scared by it. I just knew, though, that I'd feel a lot better, and probably a good bit silly, after I crossed the bridge and was on my way home. I slowly put my foot down on the bridge, and of course once I did begin to finally feel really silly. But then I looked to the side of the bridge and saw something that I will never forget. A man was dragging another man under the bridge. I then heard a blood-curdling scream. I ran to the side of the bridge and jumped down the bank, ready to help the man being attacked. But when I was there was no trace of anyone under the bridge. There were no signs of an attack. There was no indication that anyone other than me had been there. I turned and ran home and swore I would never, ever walk that way on my own again.
Number 2. The Desk. I always felt there was something weird going on in my bedroom when I was a teenager. I thought the place was haunted. I heard noises coming from my closet all the time, and the door would randomly be opened when I entered the room, despite me knowing for a fact that I had closed it. Normally, when I told my parents about these things, they would dismiss it. I would be told that I probably forgot that I had left the door open, and that the noises I heard were just the house settling or an animal on the roof. I guess I understood why my parents didn't believe me. They didn't believe in the supernatural or anything like that. Anyway, this happened on a night that I stayed up really late doing homework. I was at my desk and working on some pretty complicated maths homework. I was up so late that I ended up falling asleep at my desk. It wasn't something that I ever did that much. I woke up, feeling disoriented at first. I was woozy, and it took a few minutes to realize that I had fallen asleep whilst doing homework. I thought I'd just get up and roll into bed and sleep for a bit. I raised up and pushed my chair out from my desk. As I moved to stand up, I was shocked when I saw a little girl crouched under my desk. She was disheveled and had a really nasty wound on her forehead. In shock, I fell backwards, knocking my chair back too, and it fell over. I never took my eyes off the girl, and she stared straight at me. Then, I struggled to get up, and when I got to my feet, she was suddenly gone. I was freaked out, but I wasn't sure what to do. I was an only child, and both of my parents worked the third shift. They wouldn't be home all night. I took the blanket off my bed, and then I went into the living room and laid down. I left a light on, covered up and tried to go to sleep. It was hard though. I kept expecting to see her again. After a long time, I finally fell asleep without seeing her. I decided not to tell my parents about it. They would just tell me that I was dreaming or something like that. But for a long time, it was hard sleeping in my room. I kept looking at my desk every night expecting to see her underneath it, watching me.
Number 3. Mannequin. I hate dolls and dummies and anything like that. Anything that looks like it should be a human, but it is not alive. All of that just comes across as really creepy to me. I've always felt, since dolls and dummies really don't move on their own, that they are supposed to be dead people or something. And that has always just really freaked me out. I used to be a manager at a major department store in a mall. We mostly had clothing, so we had tons of mannequins. I hated the things, but I rarely, if ever, had to actually deal with them, so it didn't bother me too much. Plus, I was a mid-shift manager and never had to open or close the store, so I was never in the store by myself. That is, until one day, when one of the closing managers called out. I was needing the money at the time, so when the general manager asked me if I could close the store that night, I decided I could use the overtime. Being my actual first time closing, I had no idea how much work was involved. I got really behind, and the only employees left in the store had nothing else to do, so I let them go, and I went back into the offices. During this period of time, our merchandising manager was doing a promotion for a new line of clothes, so there were tons of mannequins in our back room. Many of them were covered up though, so I wasn't as freaked out as I could have been. However, sitting at the desk, with a small army of lifeless plastic bodies behind me, was not a very comfortable place to be in. It's important to keep in mind that there was no one in the store, and there was no way that anyone could have gotten into the store or the back room without me knowing. I was sitting in the room, which was only lit around my desk, doing paperwork. Suddenly, from behind me, and very loudly and clear, I heard a voice say, "Hey, Carl." I immediately jumped out of my desk in shock. Looking around, I tried to see the source of the voice, but couldn't see anything. All I saw was merchandise and covered mannequins. So I chalked it up to my imagination and went back to work. I had only been sitting there for 2 minutes when I then heard, "I said, hey, Carl." I jumped up again, this time not being able to chalk it up to my imagination. I knew I heard someone behind me in the back room. I began wondering if maybe one of the employees remained behind to play a prank on me. Perhaps they were covered up and pretending to be a mannequin. There were 20 covered mannequins, so I went slowly up to each one and pulled the blankets off of them. One by one, I expected someone to be hiding under a cover and to reach out and grab me. But after I was done, there were only 20 uncovered mannequins and no people other than me in that back room. I went back to my work and tried to get it done as quickly as possible. With the mannequins uncovered, I didn't hear a thing afterwards. When I was done, I quickly closed and left the store. I never talked about what happened to any of the other managers. I figured they would just make fun of me, but I also made sure I was never in that back room with a bunch of mannequins ever again.
Number 4. Asleep. I was so tired when I got home from work. I had been working long shifts all week, and I decided that I would just fall into bed and sleep, even if it meant getting up too early in the morning. So after taking a shower, and then getting dressed for bed, I stumbled into the bathroom. I just flopped down on my bed, and I was out so fast that I didn't recall anything after me touching the bed. I didn't even close my window, and this is significant because there was an outside light directly outside my window. It basically made it half light in my room, but it didn't matter. I was tired and passed out. I don't even know what woke me. I was laying in a very awkward position, and that may have been why. I was on my side with one of my legs almost touching me on the chest. My other arm was beneath me. I felt awful, and I turned around and laid down on my back. I closed my eyes for a moment, and I thought I fell asleep. But I opened my eyes for some reason. I don't know why, but when I did, I saw a teenage boy standing at the foot of my bed. He was shaking his head for some reason and looking down at the foot of my bed. I turned and looked at the foot of my bed, and there I saw a much younger boy crouched down holding the bedpost. He had a knife in his other hand, and the evilest look on his face I had ever seen. It wasn't a smile. It was angry. Very angry. Freaked out, I screamed and got up and ran to the light switch, turning it on, looking back, and both of the boys were gone. I didn't care. I ran out of the apartment and sat in the hallway until I was able to calm down quite a bit. I didn't have anywhere else to go, and eventually went back in. I searched it and made sure no one was there. They weren't. And I slept with the lights on.
Number 5. Storeroom. When my family went to visit my grandparents, I always had to sleep in this room that was more like a storeroom than a bedroom. It was a decent-sized room with a bed in it that was moderately comfortable. But my grandma also used it to store a lot of things in. There were also several long racks of clothing and costumes. Back in her day, she was an actress and made it a point to keep all of the costumes that she could from the performances. I guess she was a pack rat. There were also stacks of magazines and all sorts of things like that in the room. Each time we visited, there was just more and more stuff added. When we got to the point in time that this story happened, the only part of the floor that wasn't covered was a small little path to the bed, which was a twin nestled in the far corner of the room. I'm not sure if you've ever slept in a room full of racks of clothes before, but it could really begin to play tricks on your mind. There was no source of light in the room at all, and when my eyes did adjust, they often just made me see things that I knew couldn't be there. More than once, I saw an outfit or something that began to really look like a person was standing there towards the back of the room, behind all of the other clothes. But I was always able to convince myself that it was nothing more than my brain playing a trick on me, and I was fine. I was 13 when this happened. My family had all gone to sleep before me, and I stayed up to watch television late into the night. When my eyes were no longer cooperating with me to keep me awake, I decided to head to bed. As usual, the room had gained much more stuff since the last time. The light switch was on the far side of the room from the bed, something I noticed happened fairly often in bedrooms. So I turned off the light and got over to the bed and covered up. Although I was tired, I found myself unable to sleep. This wasn't too unusual, though. I spent time looking at the clothes racks and wondering. It was then that I noticed something that struck me as really, really odd. All of the clothing was on racks, and it was all my grandma's clothing. But this was a man's suit, and thus I was really surprised to see it. It was the only men's clothing I had ever seen in my grandma's storage room. I found myself looking at the suit for quite a while, although I really couldn't explain to myself what the allure was. But I was drawn to keep looking at it, and the longer I looked at it, the more I began being freaked out by it. Several times, I practically got up out of bed and went into the living room to sleep on the couch. I was so unnerved by watching this darn thing over and over again. While I was laying there, transfixed, I suddenly saw the suit move a little bit. I thought it was my imagination at first, but when I saw it move again, against one of the clothing racks, and then I heard the clothing rack moving across the floor. I listened to it scrape as it moved, and then I lost it. I jumped out of bed. I ran into the other room and I woke my mom up, telling her that someone was in the storeroom with me. My dad went to check it out. He came back and let us know that no one was in my room. I then explained what I had seen with the suit. My parents and grandma took me into the room and showed me there were no men's suits anywhere in the room at all. I was shocked, but I was still too uncomfortable to sleep in the room again for the rest of the trip. On the following visit, however, I began sleeping in there again and never saw anything else in there again.
Number 6. The Creature. I know exactly what people are going to say when they hear this story. They're going to assume that this was an episode of sleep paralysis. However, I'll have to tell them that when this happened, I was completely capable of moving. This was not sleep paralysis in any way. It couldn't be, because I was awake and I could move. Plus, I've never had sleep paralysis before. But the one thing I know about it is that your body has to be paralyzed. So this certainly wasn't the case. So it was a long day at work, and I was just plain exhausted by the time I got home. I pretty much sleptwalked through the rest of my time in the house. So I came through the door, threw my keys onto the coffee table by the side of the door, and plopped down in front of the TV, and tried my best to stay awake for a few hours. But when I decided that there was no way I would be able to accomplish this, I got up and decided to go to bed. I was so exhausted that I honestly have no memory of even going into the bedroom. I have no memory. I do have memory, though, of the blackness that I slept through. The dreamless blackness. And I slept for so long that when I woke up to look at the clock, I knew that it was at least a full 5 hours that had passed since my head hit the pillow. When I woke up, I was still tired, but I also had to go to the bathroom quite badly. So after a few moments of doing that thing, you know, that thing when you try to decide if you really don't have to pee, or if you can just fall asleep again, so that you won't feel like you have to pee. Well, after deciding that there was no way, I threw the covers off me and I scooted to the side of the bed and got up. When I turned towards the door, though, I froze. And I froze because there was something standing in the doorway. It was weird, whatever it was. I wasn't even sure what it was because it was so dark, but I could tell that whatever it was formless. But it did have 3 dimensions, and its shape was moving, almost flowing. However, it did have a mouth, and the mouth was not moving nor flowing. It was simply open. And it also had these eyes that were just staring at me. At that moment, all of these thoughts began running through my head, like thinking this creature wanted to eat me or something. It didn't move though. It just stood there and didn't take its eyes off me. I didn't think it was a ghost because I'd always heard that ghosts didn't really look at you. But I knew that this creature or whatever it was looking straight at me. I stumbled back over to my bed, not knowing what else to do. So I pulled the covers over my head, thinking that if I did that, and then removed the covers, that the ghost or whatever would just disappear. I pulled the blankets down tentatively, and when I looked, it was still there. I tried again and it was still there. Whatever was going on, it wasn't moving towards me at all. It was just looking at me. I did the only thing I could think of. I put my head back underneath the blanket and just left it there. I didn't look back again. If it was not a ghost, and it was not going to do something, there was obviously nothing I could do to stop it. That didn't mean I had to look at it though. After I had my head in there for what felt like half an hour, I looked back again, and it was gone. I, however, was too worked up by what I saw to go to sleep. I just laid in bed all night, looking and hoping that it would never come back.
Number 7. The Old Man. There is a large and very old wood forest not far from where I live. I grew up in that house and inherited it when my parents passed away. It was a really nice place and I had never lived anywhere else. But my absolute favorite thing about it was the forest that I had spent hours and hours of my youth exploring. I never heard any weird or scary stories about the forest, but I could understand why people may have found exploring in it to be quite frightening. It was a very quiet forest. I don't know the scientific explanation for it, but it just seemed like the forest absorbed sound. I've heard this could be the case when the ground is formed by dry lava, but we didn't have any volcano anywhere around us. I didn't tend to get lost in the forest, but I did once when I was 14 years old. I had been out many times, but decided to go a lot deeper this time. I wasn't the best navigator and found myself in an area I was not at all familiar with and did not know how to find my way out of it. As I was trying to find my way, I suddenly heard this weird humming sound. I followed it for a while before I determined that it was a human humming. I kept following it, hoping that I would come across someone who knew where I was. I eventually came upon an old man who looked like he was in his 70s, sitting on a big rock, whittling and humming. He didn't seem to notice me, so I decided I would go up to him and ask him if he knew how to get out of the forest. I addressed the man, but he ignored me. Like anyone, I hate rudeness, and I asked him again. The man didn't acknowledge me at all. He just continued to sit there, whittling away on the rock, humming the whole time. I finally had enough of the rudeness and told the man I thought he was being very rude, and I was lost and could use his help if he just stopped being an ass to me. At that moment, the man finally looked at me. I froze when I noticed that his eye sockets were completely empty. He smiled at me, then he completely ceased to be there. It wasn't like a gradual fading away though, he just ceased to be there. And then, immediately, I heard this loud, booming laugh literally shake the forest. It was unfriendly, I could tell. Freaked, I ran from the rock, and I didn't stop going until I was out of that forest. You know, I don't know what that was. It obviously was some sort of forest spirit or something, but I've never seen it again, and I've never gone that deep in the forest ever again.
Last year around this time, I was at a Christmas party at my friend John's house. I didn't really know anyone there, and didn't do much talking. Everyone at the party seemed really nice, and about an hour after I arrived, we started playing a game called The White Elephant. It was where you trade gifts amongst everyone, and everyone had an opportunity to steal a gift from someone if they liked it more than what they had. I had never played it before, but I'm pretty sure that's how it worked. In the middle of the game, a woman opened an envelope and read a note of what was inside. Her face turned red, and she became noticeably very uncomfortable and started looking around and was repeating, "This isn't funny." Everyone wanted to know what the note said. She started reading it out loud and then stopped. She couldn't do it. She handed the note to the man and he read it. His face turned red as well, and he seemed uncomfortable too. Now everyone was demanding to know what it said. He gulped, and then read the words, "I have killed 6 people. This is not a joke." The room suddenly became quiet and deadly serious. There were gasps, and a couple of people said something like, "Very funny." It was clear that the joyous mood was shattered. Some people started yelling and demanding to know who wrote it. I eventually asked to see it, and when it was handed to me I saw that it was typed. People began to argue and I quickly grabbed my coat from the couch in the other room, and I told John I was going to take off. He nodded and was trying to calm people down. I walked out to the door in the fresh falling snow. I haven't spoken with John too much since then, but I did ask him once if he found out who wrote the note, and he said no, and that the party broke up shortly after I left. I often wonder if it was really not a joke, and someone had confessed in a very twisted way to murdering 6 people.
Number 9. My friend. The only experience I ever had that was supernatural happened to me when I was a little boy. It is disappointing in a way, because it really began my belief in the supernatural, and although it was scary, I wanted to experience it again. And I never did. And it was so long ago now that I sometimes wonder if my memory can even recall it the correct way. Anyway, I grew up in an apartment building in Waukegan, Illinois. It was on the poorer side of town. Since Waukegan is pretty poor to begin with, growing up on the poor side should give you an idea of what it was like. I didn't make friends very easily. I mostly got picked on at school because I was small and nerdy. But when I was 8 years old, I was playing out on the walkway of the apartment building. We were up on the 4th floor. Looking up, I noticed a boy of about my age playing on the 5th floor walkway. He was scrawny and nerdy looking like me. So I thought I would go up and introduce myself and see if we could be friends. When I got up there, I saw that the boy was playing jacks. I had never really played them before and asked him if he could teach me. He nodded and taught me. I went and I played jacks with him. Then, every day at about that time, I would notice him sitting on the walkway and playing jacks. I would go up to him, and we would both play jacks for a while. When we were done, he'd walk into apartment 5C, and I wouldn't see him until the next day. It was great. His name was Robert, and I was happy to have finally made myself a friend. About a month after I met Robert, I was coming over to his apartment to play. I noticed that he wasn't sitting in front on the walkway like usual. I knocked on the door, something I had never done before, and there was no answer. I knocked on it a few more times, and then, from the corner of my eye, I saw someone peek through the blinds and then disappear again. I figured it was Robert, so I began knocking on the door and calling for him. No one answered. After a while, a large and older lady who lived in the following apartment came out and asked me what I was doing. I explained to her that I was trying to get my friend Robert to come out and play. She immediately looked really concerned. She informed me that no one had lived in that apartment for over 5 years. A young boy named Robert was murdered by his stepfather, who got angry when he had stepped on Robert's jacks in the bedroom. He was arrested, and his mother moved away, and the landlord had never rented the apartment since. I didn't really believe her. I played with Robert all the time. My mom, however, confirmed the story was true, and that the apartment was empty. I never saw Robert again, and I always wondered if I was playing with the ghost of a murdered boy.
Number 10. The Appearance. My one ghost story might not be as interesting as most other ones, and not as long, but it was probably scarier at least. My family always thought that my house was haunted growing up. They heard noises or something that sounded like something was walking around in the attic. Lights would come on, supposedly without anyone remembering turning them on. Things like that. I never believed in any of it, so I didn't care. But one night, I was up late doing homework, and by the time I was in bed, the rest of my house was long asleep. I went and got ready for bed. I heard some of those noises in the attic. You know, the one my family always thought were ghosts or something like that, and I paid them no mind. I got into bed and laid down. I was beginning to drift off when I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "Hey, Tim." My eyes immediately opened, and I looked down to see who it was. There was no one there, and I assumed I was dreaming. But then I looked down and saw a hand reaching from under my bed, and it was resting right near my ankle. I yelled and recoiled in the bed, moving up against the wall. The arm remained for a moment before retracting. My parents ran into the room to find out why I was yelling. I told them what I had just seen under the bed. They checked, and there was nothing. They were bemused, happy that the skeptic had finally experienced the ghost. I maintained that it was probably my imagination, but everyone felt I was just covering. Maybe I was. Who knows for real?
Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. My thanks to my friend Mortis Media for this collaboration. It was a fun one. To see the second half of the collaboration, make sure to visit his page in the link provided in the description, or use the end screen link that will appear at the end of this closing. I will be having a Christmas video also, but need to let everyone know it probably won't be out until later in the day tomorrow, but it will get out, so please don't worry. If you are celebrating Christmas, I hope you're having a great Christmas Eve. If you'd like to read print versions of these stories, please check out the Killer Orange Cat subreddit in the link provided. You can also take a look around at the Killer Orange Cat merchandise store. In the meantime, if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please consider hitting the subscribe button below, or using the icon of Ichigo that will appear at the end of this closing. Feel free to leave a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. You can always follow Ichigo and myself on Facebook and Twitter using the links in the description. If you have a story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please send it to the address provided in the description. My main requirement is that the story is original, meaning it has not yet been read on any other YouTube channel. I hope you're having a great holiday season, and please don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.